He came to fix a leaking sink on the 38th floor. Just another job, another ordinary Tuesday. She was the CEO of a company that changed lives but had quietly lost track of her own. Their worlds should have stayed parallel, polite professional. But something happened in that brief encounter, something unspoken. And from that moment on, neither of them could quite walk away. Sometimes it's not the broken things that bring people together. It's the quiet ones who know how to fix them. Before we begin, if you love heartwarming stories about second chances, quiet courage, and the kind of love that sneaks up on you, consider subscribing. This channel is for you. Now let's begin. A poor mechanic came to fix the office sink. The CEO looked at him and said, "Don't go back there." The automatic doors of the 38th floor whispered open, releasing a whoosh of sterilized air and the faint hum of a high-end espresso machine. Inside, everything gleamed: brushed steel fixtures, frosted glass panels, the kind of immaculate order that suggested important people move through here, making important decisions. And into that world walked a man in a faded navy blue work shirt with the name Ben stitched over his chest. He stood for a moment just past the threshold, toolbox in hand, feeling as out of place as a wrench in a jewelry box. His boots, worn and dusty from another job across town, squeaked awkwardly on the polished floor. A receptionist glanced up from her screen and frowned. "This floor isn't for maintenance," she said. Her voice clipped. Ben checked the job order again, tracing the handwriting with his calloused thumb. "Says here it's the executive suite. Something about a leak under the sink." The woman gave a tight smile, the kind you give when you'd rather not argue in front of strangers. "Someone must have sent you the wrong way. Facilities is through the service elevator, sub-level 2. Before Ben could reply, a voice clear, measured and unmistakably authoritative, echoed across the space. "It's fine, I called him up here." The receptionist straightened immediately. "Miss Whitmore." "I didn't realize." "It's fine," Claire said again, softer this time. Then she turned to Ben. "You're with All Fix Plumbing." Ben gave a single nod. "Yes, ma'am." She looked at him for a long beat, her gaze unreadable, not judging, just seeing. Then she tilted her head toward the corner office at the end of the corridor. "Come with me and don't go back there." Ben blinked. "Sorry." Claire paused as if she surprised herself by saying it aloud. "Just don't take the back route. Come this way, please." There was something in her tone, not commanding now, but imploring, that made him follow without questioning. He adjusted the strap on his toolbox and trailed behind her, Claire Whitmore. Even Ben had heard the name: tech entrepreneur, green energy pioneer, Forbes 30 under 30, before she was old enough to rent a car. Now the youngest CEO of one of the most promising sustainability startups in California. A woman who'd climbed fast and hard in a man's world, and yet from where he walked she didn't seem arrogant, just tired. The office was expansive, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the bay, but sparsely decorated: a single abstract painting, a long table with untouched coffee cups, one orchid on the desk slightly wilted. "The sink's back here," she said, leading him to a minimalist kitchenette. "It's been dripping for a week. Engineering said they'd look into it, but I got tired of waiting." Ben knelt to inspect the pipes without a word. His fingers, steady and sure, moved with quiet confidence. He didn't look like a man who belonged in a boardroom, but he worked with the grace of someone who had nothing to prove. Claire leaned against the counter, arms folded, watching him. "You always work alone?" she asked after a minute. Ben didn't look up. "Most days easier that way. Don't like people." He gave a short chuckle. "I like people fine. I just like fixing things more." Claire didn't smile, but something in her expression softened. "Well, that makes one of us," she murmured. Silence settled. Not uncomfortable, just open. Ben tightened a valve. "You ever try fixing anything yourself?" Claire raised a brow. "I build companies." "Does that count?" He looked up at her then. "Only if you do it with a wrench and a roll of duct tape." She gave the faintest smile, barely more than a lift at the corners of her mouth. "I have people for that." He nodded, returning to his work. Figured more silence. The kind that says two people are thinking the same thing but haven't yet found the courage to say it. After a few minutes, Ben stood wiping his hands on a rag. "All set, nothing serious." Just needed a new washer and some tightening. Should be good now, thank you, Claire said. That was fast, Ben shrugged. Most things are, if you don't overcomplicate them. She met his eyes. You'd be surprised how many people make a living out of doing just that. Ben gave her a small smile, then reached for his clipboard. If you need anything else fixed, I might, she said quickly, then caught herself. I mean, not just plumbing. There's an espresso machine in the break room that sounds like a dying walrus. Could be a fun challenge. Ben chuckled. Not really in the manual, but I'll take a look if I'm around. Claire watched him walk to the door. Something in her wanted to stop him, not for another repair, not for coffee, just to see if he'd say something unexpected, something real. But Ben only paused once, so hand on the door, then glanced back. You sure you're okay with me going out the front? Claire hesitated. Then she said softly, you should go out the way you came in. People like you don't need to sneak around the back. Ben looked at her for a moment, that same unreadable, quietly assessing look she'd given him, then nodded. See you around, Miss Whitmore. Claire, she said. Just Claire. He smiled, then disappeared down the corridor, boots squeaking a little less now. Claire stood there long after the door closed, the sound of dripping water finally gone. And in its place, something else lingered. Not silence, but a shift. Like something had been knocked loose, not broken, just waiting to be fixed. Claire Whitmore sat alone at her desk, elbows resting on the cool walnut surface, her gaze fixed on the skyline beyond the wall of glass. The San Francisco Bay shimmered in the late afternoon sun, but her mind wasn't on the view. It was still back in the kitchenette, hovering over a man in a work shirt, with sleeves rolled up and hands so sure they made fixing a sink look like poetry, Ben Callahan. He'd been gone less than 10 minutes, but something about him lingered. Not his presence, no, it wasn't that kind of thing. It was the way he had looked at her. No calculation, no polite deference, no awkward attempts to impress. Just honesty, simple and steady, like the quiet thrum of a reliable engine. Claire leaned back, letting the chair sigh under her weight. She rubbed her temples, trying to shake the thought. It wasn't the first time someone new had walked into her office, but it was the first time she'd wished they hadn't left so quickly. A soft knock broke her reverie. Come in, she called Rachel, her assistant peeked in tablet in hand. Your 5 o'clock Zoom is on standby. Should I push it? Claire waved her off. Tell them I'll join in 5. I just need a moment. Rachel hesitated. Everything all right, Claire offered a practiced smile. Just fixing a leak. When Rachel left, Claire stood and walked over to the small table by the windows, where 2 mismatched coffee mugs still sat. One of them had a chip near the handle, the same one Ben had used. She reached for it absent-mindedly, fingers tracing the crack like a question. Her father would call it a weakness. The sentimentality, emotion gets in the way of execution, he used to say. And maybe he was right. Maybe that was why she hesitated now. Why after 3 weeks of negotiation, the acquisition deal still sat unsigned on her desk. It wasn't that she didn't know how to close. Claire had brokered tougher deals at 28 than most executives did in a lifetime. But this one. This meant handing over everything she'd built. Greenwave had been her fight, her redemption in a way, and giving it up, even for a lucrative buyout, felt like betrayal. She turned back toward her desk. The file with the offer letter remained untouched since morning, a bold red tab marked urgent on the front. She ignored it and reached for her phone instead. Her finger hovered over the contacts list. What was she even doing? Ben had no email signature, no title, no LinkedIn profile with buzzwords like visionary leader or disruptive strategist. He probably didn't even know she was the CEO. He hadn't treated her like one. And that, oddly enough, had felt like oxygen. She found his number on the work order, still logged in the system. Ben Callahan, All Fix Plumbing. No frills, just a name and a service. Her thumb hesitated over the call button. She didn't press it. Instead, she sent a message. If you're ever in the area again, the espresso machine still sounds like it's dying. No pressure. She stared at the screen for a few seconds after hitting send, then tossed the phone face down and opened her laptop. The Zoom window blinked to life and a boardroom full of faces came into view. Middle-aged men in tailored suits, 2 women in clean pastels, all nodding politely. Claire, glad you could join us. One said, voice flat, rehearsed. We were just reviewing the latest valuation numbers. She nodded, smiled, and said all the right things, but her mind wandered. Not far, just across the city maybe, to a man who fixed things with his hands and looked at people like they mattered. Across town, Ben was elbow deep under the hood of a retired Chevy that hadn't seen the freeway in a decade. His small garage, more a glorified shed behind the trailer where he lived with his daughter Sophie, smelled of oil rust and the faint tang of engine coolant, the kind of place where most people would hold their breath. Ben called it home. Sophie sat cross-legged on an overturned crate nearby, sketching in a dog-eared notebook. Her headphones dangled from one ear. "You get paid yet?" she asked without looking up. Ben grunted, tightening a bolt. "Not yet. They send it through some system. Might take a day or two." She paused. "You ever fix a sink on the 38th floor?" before Ben smirked. "Nope. First time. Was she nice?" He froze the wrench mid-turn. "Who, the woman? The one who called you up?" Ben stared at the engine. "Yeah, she was different." Sophie finally looked at him, one eyebrow raised. Different how Ben didn't answer right away. He cleaned his hands on a rag and leaned against the fender thinking, she looked like she carried a lot, but held it real quiet. "Sophie tilted her head like you?" He gave her a half smile. Maybe his phone buzzed on the nearby workbench. He picked it up expecting a job alert or payment notification. But there it was, the message: Claire Whitmore. The espresso machine. Ben read the text once, then again. It wasn't flirty, wasn't formal, just human. He liked that. He looked at Sophie, who was now watching him. "Should I go back?" he asked, mostly to himself. She shrugged. "You said the sink was fixed." He nodded. "Then maybe it's not about the sink." Ben looked at the message one more time, then pocketed the phone and went back to work. But the next morning he made sure to pack an extra wrench, just in case. Ben Callahan wasn't a man who overthought things. He believed in turning bolts, not turning phrases. But as he stood in the parking garage beneath the Greenwave headquarters the following morning, staring at the elevator panel and holding a small box of espresso machine parts, he felt more uncertain than he had in a long time. He'd gotten the message. He'd read it 3 times, then slept on it. He didn't want to misread things. Didn't want to assume that a polite note from a woman like Claire Whitmore meant more than it did. But then again, she hadn't needed to message him at all. And now here he was, in a button-up shirt that wasn't stained, with clean boots and a clean shave, carrying parts he had no real obligation to bring. He wasn't even sure if he'd get past the front desk. The elevator dinged open on the 38th floor. Ben stepped out, half expecting to be stopped again, but this time the receptionist didn't look up from her screen. That was fine by him. He was halfway to the executive break room when he heard her voice behind him. "I didn't think you'd actually come." He turned. Claire was standing just outside her office, holding a file against her chest, her heels clicking softly on the tile as she approached. Today her hair was up, her makeup subtle, her suit a muted navy that made her look both powerful and exhausted. Ben gave her a small smile. Didn't seem right to leave a dying walrus to suffer. That earned him something rare, a laugh. It was short and unexpected, like a note played on the wrong key, but still beautiful. Claire gestured toward the break room. "It's over here. You'll hear it before you see it." As they entered, the machine in question let out a violent sputter followed by a groan and a hiss that sounded like steam escaping from a haunted pipe organ. Ben gave a low whistle. "You weren't exaggerating. I tried to warn you." He knelt beside the machine, setting his toolbox down. Claire lingered nearby, arms crossed, watching him work with quiet fascination. There was something grounding about the way his hands moved, methodical, certain, no wasted motion. "Do you always fix things this calmly?" she asked. Ben glanced up, a wrench in hand. Panic never tightened a bolt. Claire smiled, then leaned against the counter. "That should be on a bumper sticker." He chuckled. "I'll get my daughter to design it. She's got a knack for sayings." "You have a daughter, Sophie, 14. Smarter than me, thank God." Claire tilted her head. "She get that from her mother." The wrench paused, Ben's shoulders tensed just slightly, barely noticeable. "She got that from herself," he said. "Her mother passed when she was 4. Claire's face softened. "I'm sorry." Ben gave a quiet nod. "Me too." The moment hung in the air, not heavy but real, shared silence. Then the machine sputtered again, and Ben returned to work. Claire, sensing the line she'd crossed, shifted gears. Most people don't respond to my messages, she said. At least not without checking with my assistant. First, Ben looked up. That why you sent it? To see if I'd be different? No, she said, then hesitated. I sent it because you didn't treat me like a position. You weren't trying to sell me anything, I fixed things. That's all. No, it's not, Claire said quietly. You see things that's different. Ben didn't know what to say to that. So he tightened another bolt. After a minute, he asked, You always drink your coffee alone? Claire blinked. What in the executive suite? 2 mugs, same table. One always seems untouched. She glanced toward her office lips, parting in surprise. You notice that Ben shrugged. I notice things like chipped mugs and people who look like they've been holding their breath for a long time. Claire didn't speak for a while. Then she walked over to the table near the window, where the sunlight poured in like honey. She sat folding her hands in her lap. I used to have a partner, she said. In business and in life, we built this place together. Then he sold his shares and left Syed. I cared more about saving the planet than saving us. Ben looked at her, really looked. Not the suit, not the CEO, but the woman. And he saw it, the cost of ambition, the ache of solitude disguised as success. Maybe he didn't know what it meant to stay. Ben said. Claire smiled faintly. Maybe I didn't know what it meant to let someone. They sat in silence while the machine finished humming back to life, finally purring like it was supposed to. Ben stood wiping his hands, all set. He said, No more haunted sounds, just espresso and expectations. Claire laughed again twice in one morning. A record. Can I pay you for this? Ben shook his head, already covered. Call it a loyalty discount to what coffee? To people who don't hide behind doors, he said, then added, even when it'd be easier to. Claire looked down, then back up. You're not what I expected. Ben slung his toolbox over his shoulder. Neither are you. He turned to go, then paused at the doorway. If you ever need help with something that's not a machine, I'm decent with messes too. Claire smiled. I'll keep that in mind. As Ben disappeared down the corridor, Claire sat for a long while staring at the second coffee mug now filled and warm on the table. For the first time in a very long time, she didn't drink it alone. The hallway of Claire Whitmore's childhood memory had always been painted white, the sterile kind of white found in old hospitals and unrenovated schools. But in her dreams, that hallway always led to one thing, the sound of dripping water and a closed door she could never open. That morning, as she stared at the security footage of her office lobby, not for safety reasons, but just to confirm that yes, Ben Callahan had indeed returned for the espresso machine, Claire found herself remembering that door again. Maybe it was the way he'd looked at her, or the way he noticed things others didn't. But before she could follow that thought, her phone buzzed. Missed call, head of PR, voicemail. 1 minute 47 seconds. She pressed play. A polite panic poured through the speaker. Hi Claire, sorry to bother you early. There's been some chatter online. Apparently someone from the custodial department recorded a TikTok last night of our sub-level. The pipe leak is worse than we thought. The footage has already hit 40,000 views. It's being framed as an environmental irony. You know, green tech company with flooding issues. Thought you'd want to know before the board calls. Claire closed her eyes and exhaled. The irony wasn't lost on her. She slipped on her blazer, and headed for the sub-levels. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Ben had his own crisis brewing, this one over a half-eaten granola bar and a hastily packed lunchbox. Dad, they said, if I don't pay the second tuition installment by Friday, I can't register for the art elective. Sophie said, sitting cross-legged on the kitchen counter in her school hoodie ponytail, bouncing with every word Ben set down his mug. I thought they gave us until the end of the semester. They moved it up. Something about budget cuts. Miss Landry even offered to sponsor me, but I said no. Ben raised a brow. You said no. Sophie straightened her shoulders because I knew you'd figure it out. He smiled tightly, masking the dread rising in his chest. I'll call them today. You sure I've got a few invoices clearing? We'll be fine. Sophie grinned. I knew it. You always make it work. She hopped off the counter, kissed his cheek, and grabbed her backpack. When she was gone, Ben sat in silence, sipping lukewarm coffee, the smile long gone. By midday, Claire was in the sub-level basement, walking carefully over damp concrete. Pipes groaned above, echoing like a warning. A thin stream of water trickled from a junction behind the main utility panel. Facilities had taped a handwritten sign over it. Do not touch. Awaiting external service. Claire ripped the sign off and dialed the number from memory. All Fix Plumbing. It's Claire Whitmore, she said, from Greenwave. There was a pause. Then what's broken this time? She smiled in spite of herself, a little more than coffee. You free this afternoon? Ben arrived 2 hours later. He was quieter than usual, not distant, just carrying something heavy. Claire didn't ask. She simply handed him a flashlight and led the way down. They stood side by side in the poorly lit corridor. Ben examined the leak without speaking, then turned to her. You shouldn't be down here, he said. I built this company from a borrowed laptop and secondhand office chairs. I've been in worse basements. He gave a half smile. Fair enough. As he worked, she asked softly, did something happen today? Ben's hands paused mid-tighten. Just life bills. Deadlines, you know the drill. She didn't press, but something in her shifted. She remembered her own father, not the empire builder she sparred with now, but the man who used to sit in their garage on Saturday mornings, fixing old radios for fun. She remembered the calluses on his hands before they were traded for cufflinks. Was Sophie the one you mentioned before? Claire asked gently. Ben looked up surprised. Yeah, that's my girl. She sounds special. She has draws like she's got the whole world inside her head. Claire nodded, then asked, what would you do if someone gave her everything she needed? He blinked. Why, I'm just curious. He stood and wiped his hands. I'd say thank you. Then I'd make sure I could keep it going without them. Because help is help. But pride's a stubborn thing. She didn't reply, but the weight of his words stayed with her. Together they fixed the pipe. It wasn't glamorous, just clamps and sealant and elbow grease. But as the leak slowed to a stop, Claire felt a small, strange surge of pride. She'd contributed, not with money or decisions, but with presence. When they walked back upstairs, Ben lingered at the threshold of her office. You don't have to cover this one, he said. It was personal. Claire crossed her arms. What if I insist? Then I'll send you a proper invoice, he said with a smirk. She was about to reply when her phone buzzed, this time a notification from the school board. Ben glanced at the screen and paused. You have kids, Claire's voice faltered. It was the first time she'd said it aloud in years. Ben waited, not pushing, just listening. He was a month old. Claire said finally, it was a genetic disorder. Nothing we could have done. His name was Lucas. The silence between them was deep, not uncomfortable, but holy. I'm sorry, Ben said softly. Me too. They stood in that quiet, and something unspoken passed between them, a shared grief, different in shape but equal in weight. Then Claire said, you know you're a terrible plumber. Ben raised a brow, because every time you fix something, you leave something else leaking. Ben laughed, and for the first time in days, so did she. As he turned to go, Claire called after him. Ben, he turned. I know you said help is help, but if I were to offer it not out of pity but out of belief in someone, would you take it? Ben's expression was unreadable for a long moment. Then he said I'd think about it. And then he left, toolbox in hand, leaving behind a pipe that no longer dripped and a heart that suddenly did. Ben Callahan knew better than to get comfortable in places like the 38th floor. He wasn't built for offices with touchless faucets and air that smelled like eucalyptus. Still, over the past few weeks, he'd walked those hallways more times than he could count, fixing this, adjusting that, always under the radar. Always with a quiet nod from Claire Whitmore. But on Friday morning, things shifted. He was patching a faulty valve in the executive restroom when a sharp voice cut through the quiet like a razor. Excuse me, you're not supposed to be in here. Ben straightened slowly. A man in a sleek charcoal suit stood in the doorway, a tablet in one hand, an attitude in the other. Ben wiped his hands on a rag. Just doing a quick repair? Ms. Whitmore asked. Miss Whitmore doesn't authorize restroom access without clearance. This floor is reserved for executives and external partners. The man looked him up and down, eyes narrowing. And you are neither. Ben had spent most of his life ignoring looks like that. The kind that stripped you of dignity without needing to say a word. But this time it hit harder. Maybe because this building, this corner of Claire's world, had started to feel less foreign. She knows I'm here, he said calmly. If there's an issue, you can speak with her? I intend to, the man said, tapping the screen. You can wait in the service lounge on sub-level 1. Someone will escort you. Ben's jaw tightened, but he nodded. He wasn't here to make waves. Still, as he walked past the man, he heard the murmur low but clear enough. Why do we keep letting these people up here? These people. Ben didn't stop walking, but he heard every syllable like a nail in the floor beneath him. Claire was mid-meeting when the ping came in. A message from Julian Parks, head of investor relations. Security incident, non-staff individual found on executive floor. No badge, will escalate if necessary. Her pulse quickened. She stood abruptly, cutting the meeting short, and made her way down to sub-level 1. Ben was sitting alone on a bench near the boiler room, arms crossed, toolbox at his feet. He didn't look up when she approached. I'm so sorry, she said still. He didn't look at her. Didn't realize fixing a leaky sink required clearance these days. Julian had no right to speak to you that way. I didn't know you didn't stop it either. That stung more than she expected. I wasn't there, she said softly. That's kind of the point. He finally looked at her, and the hurt in his eyes wasn't about a restroom or a badge. It was something deeper, older. I've been invisible in nicer places than this, he said. But I thought this one was different. Claire sat down beside him, her heels tapping quietly on the concrete. It is different, she said. He gave a half smile, one that didn't reach his eyes. Doesn't feel like it. Claire hesitated, then reached into her coat pocket. She pulled out a slim access card with a dark green stripe, executive clearance. Take it, she said. From now on, you don't wait in basements. Ben looked at the card, then back at her. You sure about that? People might start talking. Let them, she said. They already do. He took the card but didn't pocket it right away. You think a plastic badge fixes what's broken? No, she said, but it's a start. And so was the sink and the espresso machine and the pipe in the basement. Ben laughed once, dry and tired. You trying to fix me now? Claire shook her head. No, I'm just tired of pretending. Some people belong more than others. He studied her for a long moment. You ever feel like you don't belong? She gave a faint, bitter smile. Every day, silence stretched between them. But this time it wasn't awkward, it was understanding. Then Claire's phone buzzed, a calendar alert. Her quarterly earnings call was starting in 7 minutes. She stood brushing imaginary lint from her coat. I have to go spin some numbers for the shareholders. Ben nodded. Claire hesitated. Can I see you later? He looked at her. Really looked. You mean in a place that doesn't require clearance? She smiled. Anywhere you like. He watched her walk away, the echo of her heels fading into the hum of the boiler. He looked down at the access badge in his hand, thumb brushing the edge. It wasn't about the badge, it was about being seen. That evening back at home, Ben was grilling 2 slightly lopsided hamburgers on a rusting charcoal grill behind the trailer. Sophie sat nearby, her sketch pad, open pencil, scratching quietly. You look like someone who had a day, she said, not looking up. Ben flipped a burger, had a run-in with a suit, like courtroom suit or business suit, worse, middle management. She snorted. Want me to draw him with a giant head? Make sure you add a tiny heart. They shared a laugh, then Ben said, You ever feel like you're out of place at school? Sophie shrugged. Sometimes, but then I remember that nobody really fits. Everyone's just pretending. Ben turned off the grill, handed her a plate, and sat beside her. You're a smart kid, I get it from Mom. He looked out at the fading sky, the first stars pricking through the blue. Someone gave me a badge today, he said. A good one? He nodded, the kind that lets you into rooms you weren't supposed to be in. Sophie chewed a bite of burger and said, cool. But you know, you don't need a badge to belong somewhere. Ben looked at her. No, she shook her head. You just need someone on the other side who wants you there. He smiled. And for the first time in a long while, he believed it. The gallery had once been her sanctuary. Before Claire Whitmore became the face of Greenwave, before boardrooms and burn rates and shareholder pressure, she'd spent her late nights in places like this, white-walled, hushed, the scent of linseed oil and varnish, lingering in the air like a half-forgotten memory. She hadn't painted in nearly a decade, but the ache still lived in her fingers, the hunger for stillness in a world that never stopped asking for more. Now she stood before a canvas she hadn't touched in years. It was propped in the far corner of her apartment, hidden like a secret. The colors had faded warm earth tones, rough brushwork, but the feeling was still there. She remembered painting it during her first year at Stanford, one lonely weekend, when her father had called to cancel their plans again. He'd always had a reason. Deals don't wait. Claire. The world doesn't slow down for feelings. She had believed him then. She had stopped asking. Now, standing alone in the early blue of morning, she wondered if that was when she'd begun to build the armor, and why now she was beginning to take it off. Her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. A new message, Ben Callahan. The espresso machine's still running like a dream, but the paint on your break room wall's starting to peel. Want me to take a look? She smiled. Only if you promise not to fix anything else? I didn't ask for. His reply was near instant. No promises. I've got a wrench and a soft spot for lost causes. That afternoon, Claire met Ben outside the office building, not on the 38th floor, but on the street. No security badges, no receptionists, just the two of them and the rusted-out Chevy pickup he called his company car. She didn't tell anyone she was leaving. She didn't have to. Ben opened the passenger door for her, clearing a spot on the seat between a pile of work gloves and a rolled-up blueprint. Hope you don't mind lunch at a place with no valet, he said. Claire climbed in, smoothing her skirt with more amusement than concern. I've had worse. He drove them to a small diner on the edge of town, the kind with cracked leather booths and coffee served in chip mugs. The waitress knew him by name. They sat in a corner booth with a window view of a gas station and an old oak tree leaning sideways. Ben ordered a BLT. Claire chose the grilled cheese. So he said as he stirred his coffee, "What do CEOs do on their day off?" Claire looked at him, then out the window. "If I told you I used to paint, would that surprise you?" "A little," he admitted. "You strike me as more spreadsheets than sunsets." She laughed, not far off. "What happened?" Claire toyed with her napkin. "I started winning, and somewhere along the way I got scared that stopping meant losing." Ben nodded slowly. "And now I think I'm tired of winning things that don't matter." He looked at her eyes, steady kind. "Then maybe it's time to start losing the right ones?" Claire smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. Not yet. Later that evening, they stood in the parking lot of the diner, the golden hour stretching long shadows across the pavement. Ben leaned against the truck arms, crossed, watching her. "You never talk about your family," he said gently. Claire's expression shifted, guarded again. "There's not much to say. Try me." She took a deep breath. "My father's a titan," she said flatly. "Built a fortune in fossil fuels of all things. He always wanted a son. Got me instead." Ben didn't respond, just waited. I tried to earn his respect. Started Greenwave to prove I could build something clean. Something that mattered. She paused. When it started succeeding, he offered to buy it. Said that was the only way it would last. Ben's voice was quiet. "What did you say, that I'd rather burn it down than let him own it?" "And did he listen?" Claire looked down. He listened the way. Powerful men always listen, with a checkbook. Ben let out a slow breath. "That's a heavy thing to carry." She looked up at him. "Do you ever feel like you're still trying to prove something to someone who stopped paying attention a long time ago?" He met her gaze every damn day. They stood in silence, two people surrounded by noise for most of their lives, finally finding quiet in each other. Then Claire said, "You know, I looked into you, right?" Ben raised a brow. "Did I pass the background check?" "You did more than that." She hesitated. "You enlisted at 19, left the Navy at 30. Honorable discharge. You raised Sophie alone. No debts, no drama, just mock steady." Ben gave a dry laugh. "I guess being boring finally paid off." "No," she said. "You're not boring. You're rare." That word hung in the air like a truth neither of them had said aloud until now. Ben looked away. "I didn't know you were still carrying that painting." Claire stiffened. "You saw it in the corner of your apartment. The colors looked like something important." "It was," she said quietly. "It was the last thing I did before I became someone else." He took a step closer. "Then maybe it's time you picked up the brush again." Claire looked at him, really looked, and something inside her softened. "And what if I don't know how anymore?" Ben gave her a smile that was all warmth and zero pressure. "Then we'll fix that. Together." She blinked, surprised at the simplicity of the offer. No grand gestures, no ultimatums, just presence. Just Ben. Later, when she returned to her apartment, she stood in front of the old painting for a long time. Then slowly she unwrapped a set of brushes from a drawer she hadn't opened in years. And for the first time in a decade, she dipped one into a color she didn't quite recognize. But it felt right, and that for now was enough. Ben didn't expect the envelope. It came in the mail 2 days later, a clean ivory-colored thing, with his name written in soft, looping handwriting. No return address, no logos. Inside was a single sheet of thick cream paper folded once. At first he thought it was a thank you note. Claire had that kind of grace. But when he unfolded it, his breath caught in his chest. It was a tuition invoice from Sophie's school, stamped in bold red letters, paid in full. He stared at it for a long time. The silence in the room suddenly louder than the creak of the old ceiling fan. His mind raced through the possibilities, but the answer was obvious and infuriatingly kind. Claire, no one else even knew. He stood abruptly, the chair scraping hard against the floor, and grabbed his phone. His hands, usually steady under the hood of any engine, trembled now. He wasn't sure what made him angrier, the fact that she did it or that she didn't tell him. When she picked up, her voice was calm. "Hey, you paid for Sophie's school?" he asked, voice low but sharp. There was a pause. "Yes, why? Because it mattered to you." And Ben ran a hand through his hair. "You didn't ask. You didn't even tell me. You just went and did it, like I'm some charity case you're sponsoring." Her voice didn't waver. "That's not what this is." "Then what is it?" A longer pause. "Then it's me, wanting to help someone who's never asked for anything." Ben closed his eyes. He should have known Claire didn't pity people. She noticed them, listened, cared, and somehow that made it worse. "Look," he said, quieter now. "I've spent most of my life earning everything with my hands. I've dug out engines in the snow-patch pipes during power outages, worked nights so my kid could have what she needed. You paying that bill without telling me? Claire, it makes me feel small. I didn't mean to make you feel that way, but you did." On the other end, she exhaled softly. "Ben, you fixed so many broken things for me. Leaks, machines, mornings. I didn't know how to get through. Let me do this one thing. Not because I think you're weak, but because I see you." He didn't answer, and she didn't beg. "Take the weekend," she said gently. "I'll be at the pier Sunday night if you want to talk." Then the line went dead. Sunday came with wind. The old pier just south of the marina stretched out into the gray Pacific like a splintered arrow. Claire stood at the end of it, a canvas bag over her shoulder facing the water. The wind tugged her coat, her hair, the silence around her. She half expected he wouldn't come. So when the sound of slow, even footsteps creaked across the planks behind her, she turned carefully, not too quickly, like something fragile might break. Ben stood there, hands in his jacket pockets, eyes dark, unreadable. "I almost didn't come," he said. "I know. I almost threw that invoice in the trash. I wouldn't have blamed you, but I didn't." Claire nodded once, folding her arms against the cold. "Why here?" he asked. She looked out toward the water. "Because this is where I come when I need to remind myself that everything's bigger than my problems. And because the last time I painted, I stood right here." Ben stepped closer, their shoulders now just inches apart. "Did you bring brushes?" She pulled a small sketchbook from her bag, worn at the edges. "I brought something better." He looked down at the cover, then at her. "Can I see?" She handed it to him. He flipped it open. Inside were pages of rough sketches, hands, buildings, the old espresso machine, even a profile of a man with tired eyes and a soft mouth. Ben recognized himself and felt his throat tighten. "You see everything, don't you?" he murmured. Claire gave a small smile. "Only the things worth keeping." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Just the wind, the sea, and the weight of what wasn't being said. "I wasn't angry because you helped." Ben said finally, "I was angry because I didn't know how to receive it." Claire turned toward him. "You don't have to. Not perfectly, not right away." He looked at her. Really looked. And in that instant, something gave way inside him. Something he didn't even know he'd been holding. "Every time someone's helped me," he said, "they've disappeared afterward, or they held it over me. But you just stayed." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I didn't know how to leave." And then, almost without thought, Claire reached out. Her hand found his, not grabbing, not pulling, just being there. Ben didn't flinch. He didn't step back. He let her hold it, let himself be held. They sat at the edge of the pier until the sun sank behind the horizon, leaving streaks of gold and lavender in its wake. Claire leaned against his shoulder, her head resting lightly. "You know, Ben said I was going to offer to pay you back." "Every cent I know," she replied, "but now I think I'll do something better. Oh, I'll teach you to fix something. One thing, your choice." Claire smiled, eyes closed. "Can it be myself?" Ben chuckled low and warm, one bolt at a time. And under that wide-open sky, as the waves lapped gently against the pylons, and the stars blinked to life one by one, something fragile and strong began to mend between them, not with grand gestures or promises, but with presence. And that they both understood now was the start of everything. The rain started sometime after midnight. Ben lay awake in the narrow bed of his trailer, staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft patter on the metal roof, that old steady percussion that always reminded him of his Navy days nights, spent curled beneath steel hulls with the ocean just inches away. Only now, instead of thinking about engines or watch duty, his mind was full of Claire. Since the pier, something in him had loosened. He didn't feel like he was drifting anymore. But he wasn't anchored either. He turned toward the small desk beside his bed. Sophie's latest sketch was pinned to the wall, a whimsical drawing of him standing beside an espresso machine with a wrench like a sword. She'd added a cape this time. He smiled, then his phone lit up. Claire, 12:14 a.m. He sat up instantly. "Hey," he answered, voice low, unsure. She didn't speak right away, just a soft breath on the line. "And then I don't know if I should have called." "You can call me," he said gently. Anytime a pause, I needed to hear a voice that didn't want anything from me. Ben shifted upright. "Is this about the board?" Claire gave a soft laugh, too quiet to be real. "They're ready to sell. The vote's coming up Monday. My father's flying in to help me transition." That's what he calls it. Transition, like I'm being moved out of hospice care. Ben didn't joke, didn't soften it. He just asked, "What do you want?" She hesitated. "Then I want to fight. But I'm so tired, Ben." Her voice cracked on the last word. Ben stood pacing now, his bare feet silent on the cool floor. "You've carried this alone for too long," he said. "No wonder it feels heavy. I can't ask anyone to take it with me." "You don't have to ask," he said. "Just don't push them away when they try." Another silence, then barely a whisper. "Will you come with me?" "To the vote." Ben blinked. "You want me there?" "In the room, I want someone in the room who knows what I've built. Not the margins, not the brand value. The soul of it. I don't wear suits, I don't care." He ran a hand over his jaw. "You really want the plumber in the boardroom?" "I want you, Ben." And that was it, the truth behind everything unsaid between them. "I'll be there," he said. Monday arrived with clouds heavy and low pressing over the city like a warning. Claire stood in front of her mirror, adjusting the lapel of her navy blazer, the same one she'd worn the day Greenwave launched its first prototype. She looked sharp, composed, but inside 1,000 voices buzzed. Her father had landed that morning. She hadn't spoken to him yet, but she could already hear his tone, rational, smug, clinical. "You've done well, Claire. Let the adults take it from here." She didn't realize she was holding her breath until the knock at the door startled her. Ben He stood there in a gray sport coat shirt collar, open, no tie. Clean-shaven hair combed back, but still unmistakably himself. Strong, grounded, unapologetically real. Claire stared for a second too long. "You clean up nice," she said. "Recovering, I borrowed the coat from my neighbor Hope. He doesn't ask for it back mid-meeting." She laughed, and just like that, the air in the room lightened. "I brought you something," he added, reaching into his coat pocket. He held out a small rusted washer, the kind used in old plumbing fixtures, cleaned, polished, with a piece of twine looped through it like a pendant. Claire raised an eyebrow. "For luck?" she asked. "For strength," he said. "It doesn't look like much, but it holds everything together." She slipped it over her head and closed her fingers around it. "Thank you." They walked into the boardroom together at 9:03 a.m. Inside it was cold and modern, all glass and steel and clean angles. 12 men and women sat around the table murmuring among themselves. At the head was her father, Martin Whitmore, tall and silver-haired, sipping from a glass of mineral water like it was champagne. He looked up when Claire entered. His expression didn't change when he saw Ben. That alone said everything, Claire Martin said. Good, we were just about to begin. I brought someone with me. Claire said, yes, I see that. This is Ben Callahan. Martin nodded once as if acknowledging a waiter. Claire's voice stayed even. He's here because he's the only person in this room who's seen this company from the inside out. Martin folded his hands, I see. Well, let's get on with it. The meeting unfolded in a series of prepared slides and projected numbers. Claire watched them all detach like watching someone tell a story about her life in a language she barely recognized. Then when the vote was called, she stood. I have something to say. 12 pairs of eyes turned toward her. I've been offered a deal that makes this company more profitable, she began, but it also strips it of its mission. I didn't build GreenWave to make investors comfortable. I built it to make change. Martin sighed. Claire, idealism is a luxury. This is a business. No, she said, it's a responsibility, and I'm not done. She reached into her pocket and held up the washer Ben had given her. This may not mean anything to you, she said, but it's a reminder that the smallest, strongest parts often go unseen, but without them, nothing holds. She looked around the table. I'm not selling. If that costs me my position, so be it. But if I'm staying, I'm doing it on my terms, with people who actually fix things. There was a beat of silence. Then two of the board members exchanged glances and slowly nodded. Martin's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Claire sat back down. And when she looked at Ben, he nodded once, not in approval, but in recognition. She had done it, not for him, not even for them, but for herself. That night, as the city lights flickered on, like stars reversed, Claire and Ben stood on the rooftop garden of the GreenWave building. She leaned against him lightly, head resting on his shoulder. You didn't have to come, she said. You didn't have to ask, he replied. They stood in silence, watching the wind stir the rooftop plants. Finally, she whispered, I think I'm starting to breathe again. Ben smiled, resting his hand over hers. Good, he said, because there's a lot more living to do. The first time Ben saw the painting, it was leaning against the far wall of Claire's office, half shadowed behind a stack of old design boards and product prototypes. He hadn't meant to see it. He was just fixing a flickering wall sconce. One of those small jobs Claire pretended required his expertise, but which they both knew was an excuse for proximity. Did you paint that? He asked, squinting toward the canvas. Claire glanced up from her desk. She had her reading glasses on, and something about the way she wore them, with all the grace of someone who never used to need help, seeing clearly made Ben feel suddenly protective. She followed his gaze and froze. That's just something old college. I never finished it. Ben crossed the room, slowly wiping his hands on a rag before crouching beside the painting. The edges were frayed. The lower left corner was slightly water damaged. But the image itself, a city skyline at dusk with brushstrokes that danced between hope and loneliness, was haunting. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then this corner where it's dark, but the light's trying to break through, that's my favorite part. Claire stood beside him, arms crossed. That part wasn't intentional. I spilled turpentine and tried to fix it. Ben tilted his head, still turned out beautiful. She looked at him skeptical, but smiling. You always see beauty in broken things I try, he said. Most people stop looking too soon. Later that evening, Claire found herself back in her apartment, the city stretching silent and silver beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. She'd brought the painting home, tucking it into the corner near the balcony, somewhere visible but not intrusive. She couldn't stop thinking about what Ben had said. Most people stop looking too soon. She remembered how often she'd done just that with herself, with others, with dreams that had once lived right beneath her skin, but now felt buried under layers of leadership expectation and years of walking into rooms where she always had to be the strongest one. That night she didn't sleep. She painted, not something new, but the old piece, that unfinished skyline. She added just a little here and there, a faint trail of birds in the distance, a single open window glowing with warm yellow in the shadowed tower. Nothing grand, nothing perfect, but something alive. The next morning, Ben arrived with 2 coffees and an unusually quiet demeanor. Claire noticed it instantly. Did Sophie give you another lecture about your coffee addiction? She teased. Ben smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. She found a scholarship form in the mail, he said. From a private high school, I hadn't even opened it. Someone nominated her. Claire set her mug down slowly. That's good, isn't it? It is, he said. It's incredible. But I think she's scared of leaving me behind. Claire's face softened. Do you think that's what she's really afraid of? Or is that your fear talking? He looked away, maybe both. She moved closer, resting a hand on his arm. You've built something strong. Ben, Sophie isn't running away. She's growing towards something. He nodded, but the lines in his forehead didn't fade. You ever feel like the better you do as a parent, the lonelier it gets? That stopped Claire. I never got far enough to find out, she said quietly. But yes, I think that's exactly how it works. For a moment, the world stood still. Then Claire walked to her desk and pulled open the drawer where she'd kept the sketch Ben once admired. She handed it to him. This is yours. He unfolded it slowly. It was a drawing of him, not the literal version, but one rendered in gestures and energy. The curve of a shoulder turned to listen. The strong lines of hands at rest, the suggestion of a man who fixed things, not just with tools, but with presence. He swallowed Claire. This is unfinished, she said, like most good things. That afternoon, while Claire attended a partner summit, Ben stayed behind at Greenwave, helping Sophie, who'd stopped by after school, assemble a new set of adjustable shelving in the community workspace Claire had recently greenlit. Sophie worked in focused silence, her ponytail swinging behind her as she drilled the brackets into place. You sure you want to do that art program? Ben asked gently. Sophie didn't look up. Do you not want me to? He shook his head. That's not what I said. She paused, turning toward him. Then what are you afraid of? Ben rubbed the back of his neck. That I'll wake up one morning and realize I didn't prepare you for everything. That I gave you love, but not enough tools. Sophie set the drill down and walked over. She reached up and hugged him, arms tight, chin, barely reaching his shoulder. You gave me the most important tool, she said. You showed me what staying looks like. Ben held her a little longer than usual. Later, when Claire returned and saw the two of them laughing over a crooked shelf that tilted ever so slightly to the right, she felt something inside her shift like a window finally opening in a house that had been sealed for winter. She didn't say anything, just watched. Watched the man she once met fixing a leaky sink, now building something far more delicate. And for the first time in years, she felt like something inside her had been repaired, not patched but restored. The sky broke open just after dusk. Not the soft, nostalgic drizzle of San Francisco's usual spring showers, but a hard, cleansing downpour, the kind that made people pull their coats tighter and cars slow on the freeway. But Ben Callahan didn't mind the rain. He'd always liked the honesty of it. At that hour, he was on his front porch, a patched-up wooden stoop with a view of nothing but gravel power lines and a leaning mailbox that hadn't stood straight in years. He sat with a mug of coffee, watching the rain cut silver lines through the amber light of the street lamps. His truck was in the driveway. The house was still. Sophie was out for a school art show, her first real one, and he'd promised not to hover. She'd left wearing lipstick and a blazer, 2 sizes too big from Goodwill. He'd barely recognized her, but she'd kissed him on the cheek and said, "Don't wait up." He smiled now, thinking of it. Then headlights appeared at the far end of the street. Ben sat up. He knew that car. Claire's dark sedan pulled slowly into the gravel drive, tires hissing on wet stone. The wipers moved in rhythm, like a heartbeat too fast. She parked but didn't get out right away. Ben stood and walked down the steps. She finally opened the door, stepping into the rain, her coat already damp by the time he reached her. "Claire," he said, surprised. "What are you doing here?" Her hair was soaked at the ends, her face pale, eyes bright, not panicked, but wild with something unsaid. "I needed to see you," she said, voice half breathless. "I didn't plan it. I was driving, and I ended up here." "You could have called," he said gently. "I didn't want to talk on the phone." He searched her face. "Is something wrong?" She shook her head. "No, not wrong. Just," she swallowed. "I've spent the last 3 days preparing for the next board meeting, getting the new sustainability division budget in place, writing mission statements, polishing investor packets, and none of it feels real." He said nothing, letting her speak. She stepped closer, her coat darkening with each drop. "The only thing that's felt real all week was you. You and Sophie. That crooked shelf you two hung. The stupid espresso machine, that washer you gave me." Ben blinked. "Claire." "No, let me say this." Her voice broke. "I keep trying to hold everything together. The company, the story, myself. But the truth is, the only time I feel like me is when I'm standing next to you." Ben's chest tightened, something inside him, cracking in the warmest, most terrifying way. She stepped forward, raindrops clinging to her lashes. "I've been strong for so long, I forgot how to need someone." His voice was low. "You think needing someone makes you weak?" "I used to," she whispered. "But then I met you." And then, before either of them could second-guess it, she reached out and touched his face, fingers cool from the rain resting just below his jaw. Ben caught her hand, pressing his palm against hers. "Come inside," he said quietly. The inside of the trailer was simple, worn sofa, small kitchen, the faint scent of sawdust and motor oil lingering in the corners. But it was warm, real. Lived-in Claire stood in the middle of it, her coat dripping onto the matte hair curling at the ends from the rain. Ben handed her a towel, then poured 2 mugs of coffee. They sat at the kitchen table across from each other, steam rising between them. Neither spoke for a moment, then Claire said, "I think I'm falling in love with you." Ben didn't move, didn't blink. Then very softly he said, "I already fell." She let out a small broken laugh. "That easy, huh?" "No," he said. "Not easy, but sure." He reached across the table, his rough fingers curling gently around hers. "I didn't want to," he added. "Didn't think I could. But it happened anyway." Claire held his hand tightly. "What do we do now?" Ben looked around his little kitchen, the leaky faucet. He still hadn't fixed the picture of Sophie pinned to the fridge with a rusted magnet, the life he'd built with grit and glue. And then he looked at her, soaked, tired, beautiful, and finally unguarded. "We let it be real," he said. "We let it be slow, and we stop pretending we don't need each other." Claire nodded, tears threatening but not falling. "I want to be here," she whispered. "Then stay." And she did. She stayed through the rest of the rain, through the silence that didn't need to be filled, through a long night curled beside him on the worn couch, her head against his shoulder, her hand on his chest rising and falling with every breath. And in the softest corner of that storm, they found the beginning of something neither of them had dared to name a home. Not in walls or titles or plans, but in each other. The garage smelled like hope and motor oil. It was a modest structure on the edge of town, once a forgotten service station, with a rusted roof and weeds taller than the fence. Now it bore a new coat of navy blue paint, clean windows, and a sign hand-carved from reclaimed cedar, sanded smooth and hung with purpose. The name stretched across it in crisp white letters, Faith and Fix. Ben Callahan stood beneath it in a button-down shirt rolled to his elbows, watching the final touches come together. The open sign hadn't been flipped yet, but everything else was ready. The front desk with a vintage cash register Sophie had found at a flea market, the coffee machine that actually worked the customer seating area, where Claire had insisted on placing a bookshelf filled with used paperbacks and a single vase of sunflowers. "You did it," Sophie said from behind him. Ben turned to her. She was taller now, more confident, dressed in a paint-smeared hoodie and jeans, holding a hammer like a badge of honor. Her scholarship had come through. She would start at the Arts Charter in the fall, but today she was here with him. "We did it," Ben said, nudging her shoulder. She grinned. "You know, people might think this name's about fixing cars." Ben shrugged. "Let 'em. You're not going to tell them it's about people." He looked toward the garage doors, one of which stood wide open, letting the morning sun spill across the floor. "They'll figure it out," he said. At exactly 10 o'clock, Claire pulled into the lot. She was no longer the CEO of Greenwave. Not in title anyway. She had stepped down 3 weeks ago after finalizing a restructure that gave the company back to its mission and its people. She still held a seat on the board, but now she painted in the mornings, consulted in the afternoons, and spent her evenings somewhere between brushstrokes and Ben's quiet laughter. She stepped out of the car in jeans and flats, her hair tucked behind her ears, her arms full of framed photos and one heavy ceramic planter shaped like a spark plug. For the counter, she said, handing it to Sophie. Because subtlety is overrated. Sophie snorted and walked off with it, leaving Claire and Ben alone. This place looks amazing, she said. He looked at her. You still think about it, what you left behind. Every day, she admitted, and I haven't regretted it once. Ben leaned against the doorframe. That's rare, she smiled. So are you by noon? Customers started to arrive. Old neighbors, curious locals, a man with a rattling truck, a woman with a bike chain that refused to stay on. Ben greeted them all with calm efficiency, sleeves, rolled hands, always moving. He was in his element, not just fixing, but restoring. Claire watched him from the front, sipping coffee, sketching between conversations. She'd started a new series called The Hands That Hold, inspired by mechanics baristas, nurses, the quiet heroes who never made headlines but held the world together. At one point, an older gentleman with a bent cane stood watching Ben as he explained an engine rebuild. Not many like him left, the man said to Claire. She nodded. No, there really aren't. The man looked at her, then back at Ben. You his wife. Claire laughed, a quiet surprise sound. Not yet, she said, cheeks warming. The man tipped his hat. You should be late that evening after the last customer had gone, and Sophie had taken the register keys home like a crown. Ben and Claire sat out back under a string of lights. The scent of cut wood and fresh paint hung in the air, mixed with the last notes of grilled onions from the food truck that had parked out front as a surprise. I always thought dreams came in big moments, Claire said, legs curled beneath her on the bench. Ben handed her a mason jar of lemonade. And they don't, she said. They come in chipped mugs and working espresso machines, in crooked shelves, in quiet. He nodded, and in the people who stay when the dream starts to fall apart. Claire looked at him, her hand resting over his heart. You stayed, so did you. He glanced at the window where her painting, the one she'd begun all those years ago, now hung on the office wall. She'd added a final brushstroke to it the night before, a beam of golden light cutting through the skyline. It wasn't dramatic, it was just hopeful. Ben traced the curve of her hand with his thumb. You know what's funny? What I used to think fixing things meant going back to how they were. Now I think it's about making them stronger than they were before. Claire leaned into him. You fixed me. No, he said. You rebuilt yourself. I just held the flashlight. They sat there until the stars came out, not saying much, not needing to. The silence between them had changed. It wasn't filled with what-ifs or fears anymore. It was filled with trust, with the knowledge that some stories didn't need grand endings. They just needed to be true. It was a quiet Sunday morning, the kind that arrives slowly, soft with sunlight and the gentle hum of a world at peace. The garage was closed for the day, a promise Ben had made to Sophie and Claire alike. No work on Sundays, he'd said, holding up his hand like an oath. Only coffee, pancakes, and people. The windows at Faith and Fix glowed with early gold, the air inside warm and still smelling faintly of sawdust and coffee beans. Claire moved through the space barefoot, wearing one of Ben's old flannel shirts over leggings, her hair pulled into a loose braid. In one hand, she carried 2 steaming mugs, in the other a cloth napkin wrapped around 3 fresh-baked scones from the farmer's market. She found Ben in the back office, crouched beside a gleaming utility sink, the very first one he had installed when they started renovating the place. It wasn't much, just stainless steel and sturdy pipework, but it shone like it had been polished for a photograph. You're cleaning the sink, Claire asked, amused, setting the mugs down on the desk. Ben glanced up, smiling tradition. Claire folded her arms, leaning against the doorframe. This some mechanic ritual I should know about. He stood wiping his hands on a rag. Not exactly, just I like remembering where things started. She stepped forward, handing him a mug. Funny, so do I. They sat on the small leather love seat near the window, steam curling from their cups, the quiet between them full of memory and meaning. The soft click of Sophie's sketching pencils drifted from the front of the shop where she was curled up with her portfolio, already preparing for her fall classes. Somewhere outside, a sparrow flitted along the edge of the sign, chirping in approval. Ben sipped his coffee, then turned to Claire. You know, when I first walked into your office to fix that leaky sink, I didn't think I'd be invited back. Claire smiled over the rim of her mug, and yet somehow you fixed the espresso machine and my life in the same week. He chuckled, rubbing his jaw. I didn't fix your life, I just handed you a few tools. Sometimes, she said softly, that's all we need. She leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. For a long moment they said nothing, just sat there surrounded by the comfort of shared space and the quiet wholeness of being known, not for what they had achieved or how perfectly they played their roles, but for who they had become when they allowed their cracks to show. Later that afternoon they took a drive, not anywhere fancy, just out toward the hills where the roads curved lazily through golden grass and wildflowers. Ben drove with one hand on the wheel and the other resting on Claire's knee. The windows were down. The radio played something old and soulful, the kind of music that filled in the quiet without needing to be loud. Claire reached into the glove box and pulled out a small brown envelope. What's this? Ben asked. She handed it to him. Open it. He did carefully, like it might contain something sacred. Inside was a photograph, faded, a little frayed at the edges, but still clear. It was the first day they opened Faith and Fix. Claire standing on the porch with Sophie and Ben, all three smiling, sun in their eyes, grease on Ben's shirt. Joy unmistakable. He looked at her. I had this printed for you, she said, for the wall, beside the sink. Ben swallowed. Thank you. No, Claire said, thank you for showing me I could live a life I didn't have to run from the road unwound ahead of them, endless and bright. That evening they returned home just as the sky was turning peach and lavender. Sophie had already lit the porch lanterns. She waved from the swing, then went inside to call her best friend, her voice full of energy and all the wide-eyed confidence of someone who'd begun to believe her future could actually be beautiful. Ben and Claire lingered on the porch, watching the sky darken. I was thinking, Claire said, maybe next month we host a community night here. Invite folks for free car checks, coffee, live music. Ben smiled. You planning on singing? Claire laughed. Only if you promise not to fix the guitar. They stood in silence for a while, the stars beginning to appear one by one. Claire reached for his hand. You ever think about what's next? She asked. All the time, Ben said. But I try not to plan it too tight. Life's better when it surprises you. She squeezed his hand. Still, I'd like to keep being surprised beside you. He looked at her, then the porch light casting a soft halo around her face. You already are, he said. My favorite surprise. Inside the shop, the sink still gleamed. It wasn't the most impressive thing in the room. It wasn't new or particularly stylish, but it worked. It held water. It did its job with quiet dignity, and every Sunday morning, Ben wiped it down like it was a relic from a life that had waited patiently for him to be ready. Some things, the right things, don't need to be replaced. They just need someone to believe they're worth restoring. Sometimes the deepest kind of healing doesn't come with grand declarations or sweeping gestures. It comes in the form of staying through the leaks, the long silences, the unfinished paintings, and the quiet cups of coffee on Sunday mornings. This story was never just about a sink, a company, or even a second chance. It was about two people choosing to see one another, really see, and deciding that maybe what they found was worth holding on to. Thank you for reading. May you always find people who hand you a wrench when life starts to leak and remind you that nothing is too broken to be loved. We'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below and let us know what part of the world you're in. If this story touched your heart, inspired you, or simply gave you a reason to smile today, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more stories just like this, filled with warmth, healing, and hope. Thank you so much for spending your time with us. Until next time, take care and remember, kindness always finds a way.